So a couple of years ago, I shot a $7,000 feature film called Good Boy. We were only 4 people behind camera, and we only used natural and practical light. So for this video, I'll go through the process of shooting with only natural light, and what the pros and the cons are. So first off, the reason why we decided to only shoot with natural light was because we were only 4 people behind camera. We didn't have enough people to set up lights. We also only had 14 days to shoot the film, so we didn't have the time and crew to actually set up the lights. And also, the film is about a guy who constantly acts and dresses as a dog. I wanted the film to feel very realistic, and I wanted the film to have this naturalistic, nearly documentarian style, to really ground the story. So it was both a practical reason, but also a creative reason. So first off, if you know you're only going to shoot with natural light, I think the first thing you need to look at is locations. If you're shooting a lot of interior scenes, I think it's important to find locations with a lot of big windows. So for example, with this setup, I haven't set up any lights. The only thing I have is a lot of big windows on my left side. And also, if you're shooting with windows, it's also smart to shoot with windows that has white curtains. This way you'll be able to diffuse the light, which will make the light softer and it'll look more pleasing. You can also double diffuse the light. You can tape shower curtains on the windows, from the outside for example, to get some double diffusion, to make it even more soft. So what we did in Good Boy was that we found houses that had a lot of natural light coming in. If you're shooting at night and you don't have daylight coming in, then it's smart to find a location that has a lot of lamps. So when you're shooting with natural light, you need to think the same way you would if you were to set up the lights. If you ever shot with key light, for example, you need to figure out what the key light is. And that's usually a window or a lamp. That's usually what you have to work around. Also, if the shadow side is too light, and if you want to have more contrast, you can find some black fabric. You can even find an umbrella, for example, that's black, to introduce more shadow on the shadow side. And then if you want to do opposite, then you can obviously find a white fabric and bounce the light back. For example, here, I'm getting a lot of light bouncing back because all the walls are white. If I was able to, I'd probably put something black on the side here, but as you can see the wall, so I'm not able to. I think what would have been better is that if I had a wall instead that was brown or something a little darker. And then when it comes to the camera you're using, you should try and find a camera that has as much dynamic range as possible. For Good Boy, we used the Arri Alexa Mini, which has a lot of dynamic range. And the reason why this is important is because you have a lot less control of the light. You have a lot less control of the highlights and the shadows. So to make sure that you have enough information for when you're color grading, you need to shoot in log, and you need to have a camera that has a lot of dynamic range. And then if you're shooting outside, you need to make sure that you're planning according to the sun. The same rules as for the windows will be the same for the sunlight. So instead of the lamps and the windows being the key light, it's now the sunlight. So what you need to do, you need to download a sun tracker app, and then you need to monitor where the sun is compared to what time it is. Same with the windows, you want the camera to be on the shadow side, then you want to shoot towards the sun to get the most cinematic image. And also, if you're shooting outside, it's most oftentimes better to shoot when it's overcast, because then you'll get a natural diffusion that looks much more pleasing. Because if you shoot in harsh sunlight, you'll get much more harsh shadows, and it'll look much less pleasing. And then if you need to shoot night scenes outside, it's pretty much impossible to shoot at night, because there's not enough light. So what we did for Good Boy is that we shot during the day and made sure that it was overcast, and then we color graded the image in post to make it more blue and a little bit more green. And then we brought down exposure in post to make it look like we shot at night. So we never shot during the night when shooting for night scenes. We always shot during the day. Some of the pros of shooting with natural light. First off, it saves a lot of time. As mentioned earlier, we only had a crew of 4 people. This meant that we didn't have the resources or the crew to set up lights. So this meant that when we shot with only natural light, it saved a lot of time, because we didn't have to spend a lot of time setting up the lights and spending time bringing out the equipment and packing down the equipment. We could spend a lot more time just shooting, which was very important for us because we only had 14 days to shoot. So it saved time, and it also meant that we could be less people on set. And another great thing about shooting with natural light is that the actors and the camera could move more freely. Since there was no lights set up, this meant that we could shoot anywhere we wanted. I was shooting handheld for the whole production, and I want the actors to be able to be free, to be able to improv more, and we didn't want to spend too much time blocking the scenes, since we didn't have that much time to shoot anyways. So that meant that we didn't really have to block the scenes. We could just start shooting instantly, and I could follow the actors, and they could move however they wanted to, without us having to worry about lights coming into the frame, or lamps coming into the frame, because there was nothing on set that we couldn't film, because we didn't have any equipment on set. And also, when you're working with a small budget, what oftentimes happens is that, especially for us, we didn't have that much experience. I didn't know a lot about setting up lights. I didn't have enough experience to really be able to get a specific look. I think a great thing about using natural light is that without having to do much work, the image ends up looking much more organic and natural. And I think for us, we wanted to have a more documentarian style that was perfect for our production. And it can also lead to a lot of happy accidents where, without us doing anything or really making any decisions, suddenly the sun can peep through and you can get this really beautiful light. It would take a lot of time and cost a lot of money, and you need a lot of equipment to recreate that with film lights. But instead, we got that naturally just by happy accidents. But I think like what's important when you're shooting with natural light is that you need to be able to adapt to the light that's coming in and be able to really chase the light to really make it work. But if you're able to do that, I think you can get some really amazing images. And then also, if you're willing to commit to only shooting natural light, instead of sometimes shooting natural light and then for some scenes shoot with real film lights, is that you'll, ironically enough, get a more consistent look. If you consistently only use natural light for a whole film, that's also a artistic choice that the audience will notice. And if that's consistent to the whole film, it will feel like a conscious decision that you made. I've seen reviews about this film that have mentioned the lighting, that it has a more naturalistic style that a lot of people enjoyed. And for us, obviously, we made that decision because we had to through creative constraints. But we also did a decision so we could lean more into the more naturalistic style. So I think when you're shooting with natural light, you need to be aware of that and really lean into the strengths of the natural light. And also, I think if you're doing zero-budget films or low-budget films using natural light, is oftentimes a much better option and looks much better than if you just do it halfway, end up setting up film lights, but you don't really have the resources or crew to do it properly. Then over to some of the cons of shooting natural light. First off, you have a lot less control compared to using film lights. You can't really shape the light precisely how you want it to. Also, because of weather changes, the light can change a lot in just a couple of minutes. In 1 minute, you can go from having direct sun coming into the windows and setting the camera to 5000 Kelvin and it being perfect. And then suddenly clouds can come in and then light suddenly turns much more soft and much more blue. And that means that in post, you need to spend a lot more time adjusting the different clips. For example, here, when I'm shooting with only natural lights, I need to spend quite a lot of time adjusting the exposure throughout the talking head so it actually matches. So that's something to be wary about when shooting with only natural light. Also, you can have a much more limited shooting window. For example, in Norway, if you're shooting in July, for example, you have like at least 16 hours of daylight. But then if you're shooting in December, for example, you can have less than 4 hours of daylight. And in some places in Norway, the sunlight doesn't even come up. You're much more of the mercy of weather and the seasons than if you're just setting up the lights yourself. So the time you're gaining by using natural light, you can also end up losing that time because you also need to wait for, the rain to pass or the clouds to come or for the perfect golden hour. So even though natural light can be great for low-budget productions, I think that if you have the resources to actually set up lights, that can also be a time saver and also a money saver, because you might end up saving time in other places. For my final thoughts, I think using natural light, especially for a low-budget production or a zero-budget production, can be a great way to save resources and also to save time. I think for Good Boy at least, it was a great decision, both practically by saving time and saving money, but also when it came to the style and naturalistic look we got from only using natural light. I think the film really needed that more grounded look and documentarian look that we got from only shooting handheld and shooting with natural light. So I think for our project, it was the right decision. And also, if you're starting out as a filmmaker and as a cinematographer, I think at the start, only using natural light can be a great learning curve to really learn to find the light and learn lighting that way. And I think the stuff that you learn by only using natural light, you can also use when you actually start using proper film lights. That was my experiences shooting with only natural light on the feature film Good Boy. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.